Endings are hard to pull off these days. If you don't pull it off, you're left with fans screaming in burning anger, destroying their copies and pretending they were never fans of it. Or at least it feels that way. In fact, in 2019, there were 3 major endings: Avengers Endgame for the Infinity Saga, Game of Thrones, and the Star Wars sequel trilogy. Of those 3, only the former was well liked, with many being angry at Game of Thrones ending and the Rise of Skywalker's ending, well, Rey Skywalker. That sums it up, doesn't it? But when you have a franchise that lasts for nearly or over 10 years, making a good ending is very hard to do. But somehow Marvel pulled it off with Avengers Endgame. It was seen as a pretty good ending that gave all the original Avengers a fair deal of closure. Tony got his rest, Steve got his life back, Natasha got her redemption, Clint got his family, Thor got his freedom, and Bruce got his peace. As I look back on Endgame, it's pretty clear the Russos designed this to be the end of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Some loose threads notwithstanding, such as the missing Gamora and Loki who escaped with the Tesseract. But I feel there wasn't much room for the world to expand. You had the 5-year time skip where everyone who was snapped out of existence essentially returned to a world that had moved on from them. And MCU media said after Endgame has occasionally gone into the troubles they face having come back to life, but it's always kind of glossed over in favor of whatever the main plot is. And not to mention, future MCU movies have introduced new plot points that don't really give too well with the time travel plot of Endgame, like the whole Eternity plotline in Thor: Love and Thunder. If Eternity was always a thing, then why did Thor not suggest they go to Eternity and bring everyone back to life? No need for time travel! But enough about that. Let's use Star Wars as an example. Back in the 1980s, George Lucas saw Star Wars as the beginning of a whole new genre. The plan was for 4 more movies after The Empire Strikes Back, with it all culminating with the final battle with the Emperor in Episode 9. But Lucas started to sour on this plan as a result of the logistics. Lucas was worried that he wouldn't be able to maintain the cast for the entirety of the planned run. Mark Hamill was in a car accident, and Lucas was very scared that something like that could affect his future plans. And his fears were more than valid when you consider how Carrie Fisher's passing affected the sequel trilogy. And we saw this happen with the MCU when Chadwick Boseman passed away unexpectedly. He also worried the novelty of Star Wars was waning due to oversaturation, which is kind of ironic considering Disney is basically being accused of doing that with both Star Wars and Marvel nowadays. So Lucas ended Star Wars for Return of the Jedi. After all, that's how things were back then. A franchise would come out, it'd run its course, and then it would reach its logical ending. Here's another thing to consider. Marvel and DC characters have existed for nearly 100 years by now. Superman, Batman, and Spider-Man have had many different incarnations. The Max Fletcher cartoons, the George Reeve TV show, the Adam West TV show, the Christopher Reeve movies, Tim Burton, Joel Schumacher movies, the 60s animated Spider-Man TV show, Super Friends, Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, the 90s animated show for all 3, the Christopher Nolan movies, the Sam Raimi movies, and I could go on, but I think you get the point. Each generation has an iteration that they could call their version of the character. This cycle is perpetuated for generations. After the MCU ends, there will be a new iteration of these characters for the next generation to call their own, and that's perfectly fine. In the last 20 years, we've had 3 versions of Spider-Man in cinemas, for better or for worse. No Way Home felt like an event, and it was. All 3 live-action Spider-Men together on the big screen, and as of the time of this video, they are planning to do a 4th movie with Tom Holland. But honestly, if No Way Home was the last time we saw this iteration of Spider-Man, I would find it to be a satisfying ending, all things considered. I've lived through the endings of my childhood versions of these characters, and while I'm always happy for the occasional return to those worlds, I understand that for a new generation, they have their own versions. It's the same way I feel about the Disney animated canon. I'll always be partial to the Renaissance era because that's the era I grew up with. But I understand the more modern day animated films are essentially to today's kids what Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, and Lion King were for mine, and that's fine. The whole idea of the Disney animated films was that they be passed down to future generations. My parents showed me films such as Snow White, Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty that they grew up with, and I hope to do the same with my kids someday. Kevin Feige has stated that he wants the MCU to go on for 80 years, and I don't want that at all, mainly because I'll be a very old man when it wraps up. And honestly, what always annoyed me was how the MCU became the de facto face of Marvel. There was an entire history before that. Look what happened to Marvel vs. Capcom when they tried to MCU-fy it. At the end of the day, what I'm trying to say is perhaps the age of the Marvel Cinematic Universe being the top of pop culture is at an end, and that's perfectly fine. It had its time, and had the chance to go out with dignity and grace with Endgame, and they didn't take it. Transformers essentially gets rebooted every 5 years or so for a new generation of fans, and it works. The same can be true of Marvel. DC is about to reboot for a new generation, we'll see how that turns out. There have been iterations of these characters before the MCU, and there will be versions of them after it's over, and that's perfectly fine. Let this iteration end. It had its time, and make way for something new. I don't know what that will be. It's not up to me, but it's okay to let go.
You can rest now.
Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, please hit that bell, like, and subscribe button. If you want updates, join my Discord or check my Patreon, which are provided in the description below. See you next time.